This apartment is barely 400 square feet, but for the first time in years, the air feels like mine. The heater clicked behind me, coughing warm air into the narrow room as I stood in the middle of the studio and watched the snow dust the sidewalk below. The scent of cinnamon from the bakery downstairs seeped through the floorboards, weaving into my coat and hair like something permanent, something grounding. I didn't even like cinnamon that much, but today it felt like home. I'd unpacked 4 boxes and was now sitting on the floor, legs crossed, staring at a fifth one marked Books Plus Sentimental. It was heavier than I remembered, taped up too neatly, obviously sealed back, during a moment of optimism that didn't last. I ran a box cutter through the seam, peeled it open, and just under a stack of college notebooks and a cracked photo frame I saw it. The envelope. Yellowing edges. My name in cursive I hadn't seen in years. Lauren. It was Evelyn's handwriting, my grandmother's. My throat tightened. She'd passed away 2 winters ago, just after my birthday. We hadn't spoken much during her last year, and I had always told myself there'd be time to reconnect. But time had its own plans. Now her voice echoed only in half-remembered stories, and in the way my mother Margaret weaponized her memory. I held the envelope in both hands for a long moment, fingers brushing over the loops and the pressure of her pen. It wasn't heavy. I could have opened it. I didn't. Instead, I slid it beneath the pile again carefully. Some things needed silence before they could speak. My phone buzzed across the floor. The screen lit up with Ava's name. "Hey," I said, trying not to sound too eager. Lauren. Ava's voice always had this calm undercurrent, like no matter what crisis was happening, she'd already processed it and made 3 contingency plans. "I have news. Good or bad, I didn't ask." Ava wasn't dramatic, and she didn't call to chit-chat. I stood up, pressing the phone to my ear with one shoulder as I moved to the window. Snowflakes were beginning to cling to the corners of the glass. "You're official," she said. "Senior coordinator. Title bump, pay bump. January 3rd. For a second, I didn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed to feel the words hit the ground and settle. "Thank you," I said. "Really. You earned it. And I think it's just the beginning." We ended the call with a promise to get lunch after the holidays. I set the phone down, smiling despite myself. Then I opened my laptop, trying to ride the wave of good news into something productive. I hadn't checked my email all day, and the inbox stared back with its usual mix of work messages, promotional junk, and the occasional over-sincere chain letter from someone in HR. But one email sat there like a rock among feathers. From Margaret Scott, subject Christmas dinner. The subject line alone made my shoulders tighten. I clicked it open. "Lauren, your father and I are hosting Christmas dinner this year. Claire and her family will be joining. Please dress appropriately. 6:00 p.m. sharp. Bring wine if you'd like. Mom, no dear. No love. Not even a how are you." It read like a corporate memo sent to someone who used to be on payroll. I could have ignored it. Should have, maybe. But something inside me, it wasn't hope exactly, and it definitely wasn't nostalgia, urged me to reply. Maybe it was that bitter, quiet part of me that wanted them to see that I was still here, that I hadn't disappeared, hadn't crumbled. I typed out a short, sterile reply confirming I'd come. No emojis, no exclamation points. Then I reread her line again. "Claire and her family will be joining. Please dress appropriately." That's what stung the most, not just the name drop of my perfect sister, with her charming dentist husband and photogenic twins. It was the "please dress appropriately." As if my choices, my life, my body, my divorce, were an embarrassment they were politely managing. As if I were a risk to their image, something they were willing to tolerate for one night as long as I followed the script. I closed the laptop and sat back against the edge of my mattress, staring up at the low ceiling. My chest tightened, not with sadness, but with that quiet fury that doesn't scream. the kind that simmers behind your ribs and makes you straighten your spine. Downstairs, the bakery bell jingled faintly, followed by muffled footsteps. Then came the knock at my door. Mrs. Rosie didn't wait for me to answer. She let herself in, clutching a paper bag with grease spots on the bottom. "You look like you've had a year," she said, smiling gently. "Have a few extras?" "On the house." She handed me 3 cinnamon sugar cookies warm through the napkin. I thanked her, not trusting myself to speak. Once she left, I took one bite and the cinnamon hit my tongue, too sweet, too sharp, too much. But I kept chewing. The truth was, I hadn't been invited back into a family. They weren't inviting me back into the family. They were inviting me back into the play. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. Every year I wrap gifts hoping they'll smooth something over. Every year they unwrap them like apologies they didn't ask for. The Fairmont Gift Boutique sat wedged between a laundromat and a florist that hadn't sold a single poinsettia since Thanksgiving. Its windows were dressed in fake snow gold ribbon and a dusty mechanical reindeer that twitched its antlers every 30 seconds. Inside, it smelled like cedar and paper and something faintly floral like perfume samples tucked into sweater drawers. I walked the narrow aisles, slowly, fingers grazing ornaments and hand-stitched sachets. The clerk, no older than 20, had hair the color of bottled cherry cola and wore a cable-knit sweater 3 sizes too big. "I always wait till the last minute, too," she said brightly as I browsed. "Deadlines make me decisive." I smiled politely but said nothing. She didn't seem to notice or care. She kept humming along to the holiday music playing softly over the speakers. The energy around her was light, unbothered. I wondered what it felt like to exist so unburdened, like the air itself agreed with you. I found the compass tucked in a wooden box, its brass edges dulled with age. A tiny engraving on the back read, "The road out is always real." It wasn't flashy, but it had weight, literal and otherwise. I turned it over in my palm, thinking of my father. Richard Scott didn't like metaphors. He liked numbers and rules and the sound of his own voice echoing through high ceilings. He'd once said I misread my own potential when I decided to major in anthropology. When I got divorced, he didn't ask why. He asked how it would affect the family's tax filings. I bought the compass anyway. The pen came next. A sleek black lacquer model with a fine gold tip resting in a velvet-lined box like a trophy. The card said it was perfect for decisive signers. I almost laughed. My mother's handwriting used to be elegant, letters like ribbons. But somewhere along the way, her words started feeling like contracts, and even her signatures seemed reluctant. Maybe this pen would help her tell the truth, or at least make the lies look more graceful. Then came Claire and Nathan. I didn't hate them. Not really. Claire had just always been exact, sharp, polished. Her smile was always photo-ready. Nathan laughed like he was practicing for something. Their house was beige and spotless and full of throw pillows no one actually used. I picked out a silver photo frame, one of those customizable ones with space for engraving. I asked the clerk to etch it with perfect moments captured forever. It felt just impersonal enough to pass as thoughtful. She raised her eyebrows. "You sure you don't want to personalize it more?" "No," I said. "That's enough." At the counter, she wrapped each item in tissue and brown craft paper. She tied them off with green twine and little dried orange slices. I almost told her she had a future in presentation design, but I didn't want to start a conversation I couldn't finish. Outside, the sky had turned a smoky pink. It was colder now, the kind of cold that made your teeth ache if you breathed too deeply. Back in the apartment, I laid the gifts out on my bed. I didn't write any tags. If they couldn't guess who they were, for maybe they didn't deserve them. I reached for the book I'd half unpacked earlier, East of Eden, Evelyn's favorite, and out it slid. The envelope. Again. But this time, it wasn't just the envelope. As it fell, the flap came open, slightly revealing paper inside. I sat down, pulse tightening, and pulled it free. The letter wasn't long. 3 handwritten pages, carefully dated March 15th, 2021. At the top was Evelyn's neat script. Beneath it, in a different hand, someone legal were formal notes and a signature. It was an addendum to her will, not a memory. Not a letter of farewell or some sentimental poem. A legal document. Notarized. I scanned the lines quickly, eyes catching on the names. Margaret Scott, Richard Scott, Claire Mitchell. Then mine. Lauren Michelle Scott. Next to it, a scholarship fund in case she still dreams big. And then a line in Evelyn's unmistakable hand, for Lauren. My hand trembled slightly, but my breath stayed even. I read it again. Slower. The language was precise. This wasn't vague sentiment, it was intent. Action. Something real. I folded it carefully, smoothing the edges. The paper was warm from my fingers. I reached into my purse, found the side pocket, and slid it inside like it was something alive, like it needed protection. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I sat in the quiet and watched the cinnamon air thicken around me as the sky darkened. I kept hearing her voice, not a specific sentence, just the tone. The way Evelyn used to say my name when no one else in the family did. As if I were not an embarrassment. As if I were something unfolding, not something broken. I looked out at the snow, not really seeing it. But Grandma died in 2022. And I was told she left me nothing. The house smelled like nutmeg and judgment. I stood on the doorstep longer than I should have, gloved hand resting on the brass handle of the door I'd once been grounded behind for coming home 5 minutes late. The porch lights were bright, too bright, and the wreath was over-embellished with cinnamon sticks and golden berries that looked like they'd been dipped in varnish. Nothing ever aged here, not even the ornaments. When I finally pushed the door open, the warmth hit me first, followed by the scent of Margaret's holiday agenda, nutmeg, clove, a hint of something citrusy, and a thick undercurrent of performance. Lauren, my mother, said, descending the hallway in heels far too high for a woman who insisted on sensible elegance. Her hug was soft, but brief, cheek to cheek, never chest to chest. You made it. I did. I forced a smile. Just in time, she said. We're finishing the pear glaze on the ham. I hope you didn't eat. I hadn't. But that wasn't the point. She didn't wait for an answer. As I pulled off my coat, I glanced down the hallway past the garlanded banister toward the wall that had once been covered in school photos and family trips, the real versions, not the staged ones. It was different now. Clean white frames. A collage wall, Margaret would call it. Curated. Photo after photo of Smiles gatherings posed candids in matching sweaters. Claire's wedding, Nathan's promotion party. Last Easter by the looks of the pastels. But I wasn't there. Not once. Not even the holiday photos where I remembered standing awkwardly next to the fireplace in the itchy red sweater my mother had insisted I wear. I stepped closer. The last photo I was in had been taken in 2017. I touched the edge of the frame, and for a second I felt like a ghost walking through someone else's memory. Your room's upstairs, just as you left it. Margaret called over her shoulder, already halfway to the kitchen. I had housekeeping air it out. I climbed the stairs slowly, hands brushing the banister. The second floor was silent, muffled by thick rugs and thicker expectations. My old room still had the pale blue walls and the white canopy bed. The shelves were lined with trophies I no longer recognized as mind debate orchestra AP competitions. Everything carefully arranged like I'd frozen in time the moment I left for college. But the piano was gone. The upright Steinway Evelyn had gifted me for my 16th birthday, stripped from the corner like it had never been there. There was a painting of a hydrangea in its place. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Downstairs, voices floated from the kitchen. I paused at the top of the stairs to listen. I told her it was fine, Claire was saying, in that careful tone she used when pretending to be generous. She's got her little apartment above that bakery now. A pause. Well, it's quaint, my mother added. If you like that sort of thing. I descended without a word. In the kitchen, Claire turned just in time to see me. Her smile was immediate and tight. Lauren, she said, you look different. The bangs suit you. I nodded. Thanks. Got tired of looking like my resume. Nathan gave me a quick side hug. Hey, Laure. Still doing anthropology, I didn't answer that. Ava's words echoed in my head. Senior coordinator. Title bump, pay bump. Actually, I said I start a new position in January. Same field, more responsibility. Claire tilted her head slightly, her smile still painted on. That's great. Stability is important, especially now. I didn't ask what now meant. I didn't care. Dinner passed in a blur of polite silence and shallow conversation. I answered only when spoken to, and even then with brevity. My father Richard offered a few nods from the end of the table but said little else. He had always spoken through Margaret, and tonight was no exception. We were clearing dishes when Margaret made her announcement. After dinner on the 24th, she said, folding the napkins with unnecessary precision, we'll review final updates to Mother's estate. Legal clarity is important. She didn't look at me when she said it. No one did. I set my glass down carefully. Sounds thorough. Claire nodded approvingly. It'll be good to get everything finalized. Less confusion that way. Nathan raised his glass as if to toast the efficiency of death. The room spun with the hum of surface-level contentment of people who thought they were untouchable in their performance. I saw it all then, the choreography, the perfectly timed lines, the stage lighting, the false intimacy. And I smiled, because they still thought I didn't know. No one goes up to the attic anymore, which is exactly why I do. The floor creaked under my bare feet as I crossed the hallway, careful to avoid the spot that always groaned loudest near Nathan's old room. Everyone was asleep, at least I assumed they were. The house was silent in that deeply artificial way, like silence imposed rather than earned. The attic door pulled down with a soft grunt and a cloud of dust. I coughed into the sleeve of my sweatshirt and climbed slowly, step by cautious step, gripping the sides of the wooden ladder like a secret I didn't want to drop. It was colder up there, as I'd expected. The kind of cold that sat beneath your skin like a memory you hadn't revisited in a while. The light switch didn't work, so I relied on the moon. It spilled in through the tiny square window at the far end just enough to outline boxes, old furniture, and the silhouettes of things no one wanted to part with, but also didn't want to remember. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked toward the far corner where Evelyn's old chest still sat. It was a faded teal with a rusted latch, and I remembered how she used to keep her holiday records in it, actual vinyl, the scratchy kind that made everything sound like a memory even when it wasn't. I crouched beside it, fingers tracing the carved initials on the side ES. There was something grounding about her initials. They felt like truth. When I lifted the lid, it groaned but didn't resist. Inside were yellowed handkerchiefs, a broken locket, a cracked snow globe with the Chicago skyline, and a small wooden jewelry box. I recognized the box instantly. I had given it to her for her birthday, when I was 10, bought with the tips I earned tutoring younger kids in violin. I'd chosen it because it played her favorite melody when you wound the key. I turned the tiny brass key, now uncertain if it still worked. A moment of silence, then the melody began. Off-key, hesitant but unmistakable. Moonlight Sonata. Not the flashy part, the first movement. Slow, haunted. Evelyn had said it reminded her of walking on frozen ponds. I closed my eyes and sat back against a stack of dusty cushions. And just like that, I was 7 again, perched on the piano bench next to Evelyn as she whispered, "Play it like you're whispering secrets to winter." I had played clumsily, hands 2 small feet swinging beneath the bench, but she had smiled the entire time. Then the memory snapped. Margaret, storming in cheeks tight with social discomfort, interrupting my tiny recital in front of the neighbors. Lauren, she'd hissed, stop embarrassing the guests. Evelyn had said nothing then, just stood and turned the page of the music, her fingers brushing mine in silent rebellion. I wiped a tear before it had time to fall. I wasn't here to be sentimental. I was here for something else. I didn't know what until I saw the envelope. It was tucked beneath the box, barely visible. Cream-colored. No stamps. No markings except my name written in Evelyn's unshakable handwriting. I opened it carefully as if it might disintegrate. Inside just one piece of paper. If they silence your music, keep dancing inside. You're more mine than hers. I held the note to my chest, pressing it there like it might beat for me. There was no date. No legal jargon. Just truth. Raw and unfiltered. I stood slowly and made my way to the old keyboard in the corner. It was half covered in a blanket dust thick across the keys. One speaker was cracked, and some notes stuck if you pressed too hard. I sat, and I played. Badly. Softly. Fingers unsure. The melody struggled, stumbled, but it survived. I played the song from the jewelry box. I played it all the way through, even when my fingers stiffened, even when my chest ached. And then, I cried. Quietly. Not the loud hiccuping sobs of devastation, but the kind that feel like exorcisms, like releasing something that had been occupying space in you for too long. I didn't cry for the piano. I didn't cry for the missing photos or the untouched bedroom or the carefully curated Christmas Eve plans. I cried because Evelyn had known. Even then. She had known how this house could starve a person's truth while smiling over holiday ham. The song faded out. The attic fell back into silence. I folded Evelyn's note and tucked it into the inside pocket of my coat. Then I whispered, "Thank you," even though I didn't know if I meant for the box, the music, or the proof that someone had seen me once and still believed I existed. I looked around the attic one last time. I'm not coming to this house for their approval anymore. I'm coming for the truth. There's always a performance before the main show. Tonight was the dress rehearsal for their hierarchy. I stood in front of the mirror in the upstairs hallway, smoothing the sleeve of the only black dress I had bothered to pack. It wasn't flashy. Just simple, structured, and most importantly, unapologetic. I'd worn it once to a conference in Denver where no one knew who I was or cared who my family was. The house was unusually quiet, but not in a peaceful way. More like backstage silence, thick with people holding their breath for their cue. Downstairs, the dining room glowed. Candles flickered in ornate brass holders. The chandelier cast a golden sheen on every polished surface. Margaret had placed a single sprig of holly on each folded napkin, and the silverware was arranged like weaponry, precise and gleaming. Claire was already seated, her posture too straight, her eyes scanning the table like it was a chessboard. She wore red, of course she did, and Nathan sat beside her too close, his hand resting just lightly on hers, like a seal on a contract. I slid into my chair across from them. Margaret didn't look up. "Lauren," she said, "pass the Chardonnay, would you?" As if I were the help. I poured my own glass first. Dinner began, the way these dinners always did, light banter, travel updates, polite inquiries into careers that only counted if they came with board positions or medical degrees. Claire launched into a description of their honeymoon scouting trip through Tuscany. Something about a vineyard they were eyeing for a small ceremony, just close friends and family, well-select family. Margaret beamed like she'd been personally invited by the Vatican. Susan chimed in about the flower arrangements at her daughter's wedding last spring. Craig, my cousin, chuckled into his wine about the cost of imported orchids and how millennials can't even afford a proper divorce these days, let alone a second wedding. I didn't laugh. I actually got promoted last week, I said, filling my fork with risotto I no longer wanted. I'll be overseeing a new research initiative starting in January. A pause. Just long enough to make it obvious. That's nice, dear Margaret said, as she reached for the salt. It's good to keep busy. Claire offered a vague smile. Congratulations. Anthropology, right? That must be interesting. It is, I said. You'd be surprised what people try to bury. Craig smirked across the table. Starting over at 28. That's brave. Or maybe just necessary, I'd say both, I replied. It takes a certain kind of clarity to walk away from something broken, even if everyone else insists it looks perfect. Margaret's fork clinked gently against her plate. Let's try to keep the conversation pleasant. Pleasant is subjective, I said. Isn't that what makes family dinners so thrilling? I sipped my wine. Then casually, as if I were commenting on the weather, I turned to Claire. You know, Nathan once said you were intimidating. But maybe I heard wrong. The room went silent, like someone had sucked the oxygen out with a vacuum. Claire's fork hovered mid-air. Margaret looked up sharply, brows drawn. Nathan let out a strained laugh. Did I? I mean, come on, Lore. Don't stir things just for the nostalgia. I'm sure I misheard, I said, still smiling. Memories can be slippery. Claire turned toward Nathan slowly. When did you say that I didn't? He said too quickly. I mean, I might have said something about how impressive you are. That's what I meant. Obviously. Claire didn't respond. She just stared at him with a look I recognized, a quiet inventory being taken. She was scanning for cracks. Across the table, Margaret reached for the wine again. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were calculating. I settled back in my chair, silent now. The bait had been taken. I didn't need to reel anything in, not yet. I wasn't here to win arguments. I was here to raise questions they didn't know they should be afraid of. For the first time, I saw Nathan nervous. And I hadn't even started yet. You can tell how dangerous a secret is by where it's hidden. This one was buried under tax returns and lies. The study was the one room in the Scott house no one ever entered without permission. It wasn't officially locked, but the air itself warned you to knock. Margaret's kingdom. Books lined the walls mostly for display. Faux leather covers embossed gold titles, the kind of literature people bought in bulk to look intelligent. Tonight, while the others prepped scalloped potatoes and adjusted centerpieces, I slipped through the crack in the door and closed it behind me as quietly as I could. I'd waited until the vacuum turned on in the kitchen. No one would hear a hinge over Margaret's obsession with spotless rugs. The desk was pristine as expected. Pens arranged by height. Not a single paper out of place. I crouched low and pulled at the bottom drawer. Locked. I smiled. They always forget the things you learn when they're too busy ignoring you. I reached into my ponytail and slid out a bobby pin. I hadn't picked a lock in years, not since high school, when Evelyn had jokingly taught me how after I got locked out of her garden shed. Every woman should know how to unlock doors without asking, she'd said with a wink and a lemon cookie. It took less than 30 seconds. The drawer creaked open, revealing exactly what I hadn't known I was looking for until I saw it. A red folder, plain as anything, but my stomach dropped at the label typed across the front. Evelyn Final Draft, not to file. My hands shook just slightly as I lifted it, careful not to shift anything else. Inside were 6 pages, not copies, originals, dated March 2022. I skimmed quickly, absorbing only the bolded sections at first. Lauren Scott shall inherit the Scott family home, including all physical and intellectual property contained within. A trust fund in the name of Evelyn M. Scott shall be established with Lauren Scott as the managing trustee. This wasn't the version read after the funeral. That version had awarded the house to Nathan for family preservation, with Claire listed as co-executor for reasons no one had explained. That version had reduced me to a footnote. No inheritance designated per previous arrangements. I flipped through the pages again. At the back, clipped separately, was a yellow sticky note in Margaret's unmistakable script. Too unstable. Not responsible enough for Evelyn's legacy. File March version only. Except, this was the March version. I stared at the note. March version only. My heart pounded, not with fear but something worse. Recognition. They hadn't just erased a document. They had erased me. Evelyn had trusted me. She'd given me the house, the scholarship fund, the caretaking of her name. And someone, Margaret, maybe with Nathan, had overwritten it all. And they hadn't even bothered to hide the draft that proved it. Because they never thought I'd look. I pulled out my phone and took careful photos of every page, ensuring corners, dates, signatures were captured clearly. Then one of the sticky note. Then I put everything back exactly where it had been. The red folder slid into its precise position. The lock clicked softly as I resecured it. I stood there for a second, breathing. Calming. They hadn't shredded it. They hadn't burned it. Somewhere on some level they wanted the truth close, just not visible. I looked around the study. The walls felt narrower now, like they were breathing with me, like they knew. The piano Evelyn once played had been removed from this house, but not the music. Not her voice. She had left trails, quiet ones, for me to find. And now I had. I opened the door a crack. Listened. Still the vacuum. Still the noise of people pretending to love each other with appetizers and matching place cards. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door without a sound. They didn't just rewrite a will. They rewrote me. Sometimes you don't need to push. You just need to whisper near the fracture. The kitchen had always been Margaret's idea of informal. That meant pressed linen placemats, ceramic mugs that matched the season, and exactly 1 sugar cube per guest unless otherwise approved. The scent of toasted bread and burnt espresso wafted through the room, something between comfort and chaos. Christmas Eve morning was unusually sunny. The snow outside gleamed too brightly, like it didn't realize the tension crawling beneath this roof. I was already seated when the others arrived, quietly sipping black coffee. No cream, no sugar. Just like Evelyn drank it. Claire came in first, her silk robe cinched tight, lips, bare, eyes alert. Nathan trailed behind her, yawning like a man too sure he wouldn't be questioned. Margaret floated in next, giving directions to no one in particular. Don't forget the rosemary for the roast. Use the gold-rimmed glasses tonight. Not too much cinnamon in the cider. Richard entered last, newspaper folded under his arm, the way men from another era used to shield themselves from real conversation. We sat. To the outsider, it might have looked warm, functional, but I'd grown up at this table. I knew better. Breakfast in this house wasn't about food. It was a quiet audition for favor. The morning before Christmas Eve, a full rehearsal for emotional warfare. Claire cleared her throat gently. So we were talking last night, Nathan and I, and we're finalizing the guest list this week. Tuscany only allows 80 at the villa, so... Her sentence trailed off with a well-trained smile. Margaret reached for her coffee. Don't stress over it, dear. Anyone who matters will be there. I buttered a slice of toast slowly, deliberately. Wonder if Jennifer Morrison's coming. Nathan, mid-sip, choked on his coffee. He coughed hard, grabbing a napkin. What? I looked up innocently. You know. From college. Claire turned her head sharply. Jennifer. The name sat between them like a detonator. Margaret didn't miss a beat. Lauren, don't be rude. Claire and Nathan are working so hard on this event, the least we can do is not bring up old distractions. I held Margaret's gaze just long enough to count 3 seconds. Then I turned to Claire. Jennifer's an old friend of the family, I said, voice light. Nathan would know more. Ask him. Nathan opened his mouth. Closed it. Claire's eyes didn't blink. She reached for her juice but didn't drink it. Never heard of her. Nathan muttered. No, I tilted my head, playing dumb. Maybe I mixed up the name. Could have sworn she and Nathan were... close. Back then. Margaret tapped her spoon against her saucer like it owed her an apology. This isn't brunch gossip hour, Lauren. I folded my napkin. Of course not. Just family catching up. Richard flipped a page in his newspaper but said nothing. That was always his talent, being present without ever truly being here. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was strategic. Nathan poked at his eggs. Claire didn't touch hers. I didn't need to say more. I had whispered near the fracture. The room breathed around it, not yet broken, but no longer whole. Claire finally spoke. I think I'm going to take a walk before the prep starts. Nathan looked up surprised. Now she didn't answer. She just stood, folded her robe tighter, and walked out. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. He was already replaying every sentence he'd ever said to her. Every name he may have let slip. Every memory he'd hoped was buried. I cleared my plate quietly. Claire didn't say another word, but her smile was gone for the rest of breakfast. They dressed like a magazine spread. I dressed like a warning. The dining room gleamed like it had been laminated in old money and curated intentions. Gold chargers sat beneath bone-white plates, garnet napkins folded into perfect triangles, candles flickered as if afraid to cast shadows. Even the cranberry sauce had its own crystal serving dish. Margaret stood at the head of the table like a conductor at a silent symphony, every glance, every nod, every raised eyebrow sending a command only her family knew how to obey. Her dress was velvet, deep green, the color of wealth trying not to brag. I wore black. Not dramatic black. Not funeral black. Strategic black. Minimalist. Fitted. Sleeves just long enough to feel like armor. I took my seat last, catching a few stares from cousins who had clearly expected me not to show up at all. They quickly looked away once they saw I was smiling. Claire was radiant, of course, silk dress the color of champagne, hair sculpted not styled, her arm looped gently through Nathan's as they made their entrance, but her fingers didn't curl around his the way they had before. Her smile didn't reach quite as far. The chairs scraped, the small talk began. Pass the gravy. How's the weather in Dayton? I hear you've taken up yoga. And then, you remember Judge Halberd, don't you? Margaret's voice rang clear, sharp as fine glass. I turned to see an older man, trim beard, navy suit, a face built for deliberation. His eyes were kind but alert. Of course, I said. Grandma Evelyn's friend. You officiated her retirement ceremony. He chuckled. You have a sharp memory. I try to remember the things that mattered to her. Margaret's smile tightened by a millimeter. Throughout dinner, the conversation danced around nothing. Tuscany came up again. Claire mentioned a florist who charged 5 figures for imported white peonies. Someone joked about Nathan joining a political firm after the honeymoon. Laughter, practiced and polite, floated over the roasted duck. Then I leaned forward slightly, not enough to draw attention, just enough for Halberd to hear me over the clink of cutlery. I sometimes wonder what Evelyn really intended for the house. I said quietly. She was so passionate about long-term scholarships, about giving kids a place to grow. The air didn't freeze. It paused. Margaret, mid-sip of wine, set her glass down without finishing it. Halberd glanced at me, then at her, then back at me. That does sound like her, he said slowly. She once told me this house should always mean more than just real estate. She said that I asked voice light as if I hadn't memorized every word Evelyn ever whispered in my direction. She did. He nodded. Nathan stood abruptly. I'll check on the wine. Margaret jumped in. It's fine, dear. We just opened the Merlot. No, I think the reserve would suit the duck better, he said, already walking. Claire waited 3 long seconds before excusing herself as well. I let the silence stretch. Halberd looked vaguely amused. Margaret looked vaguely murderous. I took another bite of my asparagus and said nothing. A few moments later, I stood and quietly made my way to the hallway that led toward the cellar. The walls here had always been too thin. perfect for catching whispers. Their voices weren't whispers now. "You told me she was unstable," Claire hissed. "You said she gave it all away to charity. I didn't think she'd find that draft." Nathan muttered, voice cracking. "She didn't find it, Nathan. It was there in your mother's desk." "What else haven't you told me? I told you what mattered." "No. You told me what was convenient." "I didn't hear what came next." "Someone closed a door further down the hall. But I'd heard enough." And just like that, Nathan's voice wasn't charming anymore. It was desperate. "The best way to serve justice is cold, preferably between pie and coffee." The plates clinked with the soft finality of a finished meal, the kind of clink that said, "Let's all pretend we've always gotten along." Apple pie had been sliced into precise portions, served with scoops of vanilla ice cream that softened slowly under the heat of coffee steam. The dining table was abandoned, and everyone drifted toward the living room like ships into fog, settling into sofas, armchairs, cushioned silence. The fire crackled in its carefully staged hearth. A few embers popped like warning shots. Margaret naturally took the center seat. The high-backed chair beside the fireplace always made her look as if she were sitting for a portrait. She sipped her espresso, slowly crossing her legs, as if preparing to accept an award. "Legacy," she began without anyone asking. "It's not just what you leave behind, it's what you teach by how you live." Oh no. I swirled the last bit of coffee in my mug. Across from me, Claire sat straighter. She'd barely spoken since the hallway conversation the night before. Her eyes tracked every shift in Nathan's posture now, even when he wasn't speaking. Margaret continued, "True contribution, true responsibility isn't measured in charity or sentiment. It's measured in structure, in sustainability, in choosing what's best for the family even when it's hard." Nathan nodded reflexively. Richard remained quiet, as always. He stirred his coffee, adding sugar without looking at anyone. "It's about preserving order," Margaret said. "Because chaos," she looked straight at me just briefly, "is a luxury the wise don't indulge." I smiled, took a long, slow breath, and raised my glass. Not wine this time, just the last of my lukewarm coffee. "To Evelyn Scott," I said, pausing for effect, "who once told me the truth always arrives fashionably late." There was a moment, 2 seconds maybe, where time fell through the floor. Someone coughed. Craig, the cousin with opinions no one wanted, blinked. Margaret's hand froze mid-sip. She set her cup down with the care of someone disarming a bomb. "I don't know what that's supposed to mean," she said, composed but tight. "I think it's self-explanatory," I replied. Nathan shifted in his seat. Claire didn't move at all. I stood slowly and reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. I'd debated for hours whether to do this now or wait until everyone had left. But there was something poetic about lighting the match while everyone was still holding their cutlery. I held up my phone. A photo of the document filled the screen. The handwriting unmistakable. Evelyn's signature, sharp, final. "This," I said, "is an image of an addendum to Evelyn's will, dated March 2021. It names me as the recipient of this house and the trustee of a scholarship fund she intended to establish." Murmurs. Someone set their dessert fork down too loudly. "That document," Margaret said slowly, "was never filed." "True," I said. "But it existed. And you knew it existed." Her face stayed frozen. Nathan blinked like someone waking up on a cliff's edge. "That draft was discarded," Margaret said carefully. "It was invalid, irresponsible." I tilted my head. "Then why did you hide it?" Another silence fell. It was heavier this time. No one shifted in their seats. No one laughed it off. Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it. Claire's eyes narrowed. Margaret's lips were pressed into a colorless line. Across the room, the fire hissed. Nathan dropped his spoon. Claire didn't pick it up. Every show has an understudy. Every kingdom a ghost in the attic. Christmas morning broke quietly, but the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. Even the snow outside had fallen too cleanly, too perfectly blanketing the world, like it was trying to protect it from something coming undone. The coffee smelled sharper today. The clink of a teaspoon in a mug felt louder than it should. Every movement in the house was too measured, too careful. I came downstairs, already dressed, coat folded neatly over my arm bag packed beside me. The kitchen was full. Margaret with her posture set to regal, Nathan pacing by the window, Claire sitting still as glass. Judge Halberd sipped coffee slowly as if waiting for a verdict he wasn't ready to hear. "I'll be leaving today," I said, tone even. "But before I go, there's something I want to share. Not for forgiveness, just for the record." Margaret looked up like someone bracing for thunder. "Lauren." I hardly think I tapped my phone. The Bluetooth connected. The small speaker on the counter blinked blue. The audio clicked on. The first voice was unmistakably Margaret's. "She's too emotional. We'll say Evelyn was confused in March. File the February draft instead." A pause. A sigh. Then the second voice. Less familiar. Male precise, the estate lawyer. "If you're sure. Just be aware the March addendum could raise questions if discovered. Not if we manage it." Evelyn was old. People forget. The speaker crackled back into silence. "I didn't add anything. I didn't need to." Claire was the first to move. Her hand, steady and unhurried, reached for her engagement ring. She slid it off like she was removing a splinter, small, sharp, long overdue. She placed it on the tablecloth, the metal sound dull against the wood beneath. Nathan stared at it like it had turned into something he didn't recognize. His mouth opened, then closed. Again. Margaret's eyes were fixed on me. But there was something different now. Not rage, not even panic. Recognition. Halberd cleared his throat slowly. "I may need to report this as a conflict of interest. I was a friend of Evelyn's, and a judge is still a citizen first." Margaret's chin lifted like she was pulling herself back into a mask, but it wouldn't sit right anymore. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "I don't think it is," I replied. No one moved to deny it. Behind me, the Christmas tree blinked in colored patterns, red, green, gold, as if trying to hold on to tradition, while everything around it shifted. I picked up my coat. The house that built perfection just cracked at the foundation. Truth doesn't need an invitation. It just walks in and changes the seating chart. Breakfast was quiet but not gentle. The clink of cutlery was replaced with a kind of taut stillness, like air held hostage. No one passed the butter. No one asked about the weather. Margaret buttered her toast with movements too graceful, too measured, as if pretending nothing had happened made it so. Nathan sat rigid beside her, shoulders squared but eyes darting. Claire didn't speak. Her fingers drummed a faint rhythm against the rim of her coffee mug. The ring she'd left on the table the night before had not returned to her hand. I wondered if Nathan noticed. I wondered if he knew she didn't need to say a word. Her silence was indictment enough. Richard kept his gaze low, tracing invisible lines in the tablecloth. His loyalty had always been selective. Now it just looked exhausted. Judge Halberd waited until Margaret set down her knife. Then he cleared his throat. "I believe we need to talk," he said, voice calm, judicial. "Properly, privately, but formally." Margaret didn't flinch. "About what exactly?" He didn't smile. "You know what?" Half an hour later, the drawing room felt like a courtroom. The chairs were arranged too neatly. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, exposing more than just dust. Claire sat at one end, folded in on herself, but watching everything. Nathan lingered behind the armchair, not next to anyone. Richard stayed standing. Margaret perched on the edge of the longest sofa, pearls in place, posture defiant. She didn't look at me once. Halberd opened his notebook. "There's a discrepancy between the will read last year and the addendum Lauren found, and based on the audio, there seems to be a deliberate effort to suppress it." "Evelyn was confused," Margaret said quickly. She was emotional, easily swayed. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Then explain this. I tapped the screen and the video filled the room. It was Evelyn's birthday, March 12th, 2021. Her smile was gentle but sharp. Her voice was strong. Lori, I'm proud of you. I've set up a fund, sweetheart, in case you still want that master's. It's in the March addendum. If they try to change it, you keep dancing anyway, all right? Love is legacy. But truth, that's forever. The video ended. Silence followed. Margaret smoothed her skirt. That doesn't mean she was of sound mind legally. No, Halberd said, closing his notebook, but it suggests she was lucid. It contradicts your claim. And the decision to file an earlier draft without disclosure raises legal questions. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. You're overstepping. I'm a civil court judge and a former executor in several estate cases. I know what conflict of interest smells like. Margaret tried to speak, but the words faltered. Nathan took a step back just slightly, like his own proximity to her might burn him. Claire glanced up and caught it. Halberd stood. This will go beyond the family. I'll contact the estate board Monday. There needs to be a formal inquiry. Claire's mug trembled slightly as she set it down. I didn't smile. There was nothing to celebrate yet. But the room felt different now. Something had shifted. The narrative wasn't hers anymore. Margaret's mask didn't slip. It shattered. There's a special kind of silence that only comes after exposure. It was the kind of silence that didn't beg to be filled. It pressed in from every corner of Judge Halberd's chambers, thick and settled like winter fog on Fairmont's sidewalks. The kind of silence that made you more aware of your own breathing, your own pulse, of what had just fallen apart and what might still. It was 3 days after Christmas, and for once, I wasn't the one holding tension like a violin string. I sat upright, calm, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Across from me, Judge Halberd looked older than I remembered, as if truth had aged him too. The board has reviewed the materials, he said at last. I've submitted the full file, the recording, the March video, and your copy of the will. On his desk, my grandmother's handwriting, scanned, labeled official, now peeked from a manila folder. Will they take action? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. At minimum, they'll open an investigation. If there's proof of suppression or misrepresentation, it could escalate. Tampering with a will isn't just unethical, it's a legal offense. My phone vibrated. Ava Chen calling from Dayton. I held it up, and Halberd waved for me to answer. Speaker's fine, he said. Ava's voice filtered in, sharp-focused. I've reviewed Illinois estate law. If Evelyn's March addendum is authenticated, and we believe it will be, Margaret and Nathan could be charged with fraud. Possibly obstruction. She paused. But more importantly, the scholarship fund will be reinstated. That's the real win. I looked at the folder again. The line Evelyn wrote still echoed for Lauren, in case she still dreams big. A knock at the door. Halberd opened it. Claire stepped inside, her coat dusted with snow, lips pressed together in a way that suggested she'd rehearsed everything she was about to say and hated that she had to say it. She handed Halberd a document. My affidavit, she said. He skimmed it. You're sure about this? I was in the hallway, she said, glancing at me. I heard Nathan tell Margaret that Evelyn's last changes were inconvenient and impossible to enforce if no one knew about them. She took a breath. He said, just file the version that keeps it clean. Ava exhaled quietly through the phone. That may be the piece we needed. Claire sat beside me. She didn't touch my hand. She didn't have to. I felt the tears well before I knew they were coming. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet heat behind the eyes, the way a kettle warns before it screams. I never wanted the house, I said, barely above a whisper. I wanted to stop feeling like a mistake. Claire turned to me, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You're not a mistake, Claire says. But they were. When people fall from grace, it's not the ground that hurts. It's the silence. Fairmont didn't do scandals like the city did. There were no flashing cameras, no reporters parked outside driveways. Just whispers. Long, quiet ones that slithered through bakeries and bookshops, folded themselves into morning coffee at the Elm Cafe, and snuck beneath doors with the mail. The kind of whispers that didn't fade, but settled. By December 28th, Margaret's chair on the local arts board was reevaluated. Her name was absent from the New Year's gala invitation. No statement had been issued, no apology. Just a silence so deafening it rang like crystal, empty, precise, sharp. Nathan's firm announced he was on administrative leave pending internal review. I heard about it from a neighbor who used to babysit me. Shame, she said. So much talent in that family, and yet... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The damage wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, measured, final. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't tell Ava or Claire how for a moment I wanted to scream down Main Street. They tried to erase me. Look who's invisible now. Instead, I declined every press request. I left calls unanswered. I stayed in the small apartment above the bakery and let Rosie slip extra cranberry scones into my bag, without saying a word about the paper that had my family name in bolded scandal font. Then on the last morning of the year, an envelope arrived. No return address. Just my name. Inside a single note. Lauren May, we speak privately before the year ends, for clarity. M. She didn't even sign it, Mom. I didn't owe her a reply, but I gave her one anyway. We met at the Fern Room in the Fairmont Botanical Conservatory, a place Margaret used to visit for brunches and galas, when her smile was still a currency she could trade. Now she looked smaller, not physically, but in presence, like someone had dimmed her from the inside. I appreciate you coming, she said, voice carefully polished. There's been considerable confusion, and perception, as you know, shapes reality. I let the silence stretch. She shifted. I think she continued it would be beneficial if we issued a joint statement. Something tasteful. To honor Evelyn's legacy and clarify that this was a family misunderstanding, not malicious intent. Ah, there it was. Not guilt. Optics. Is this for Evelyn, I asked, or your seat at next spring's exhibition? Margaret blinked, then composed. Both can matter, Lauren. Legacy isn't singular. I studied her. The way her hands stayed folded, the way her voice didn't rise. She was holding on to civility like a lifeline, terrified of slipping into something as base as consequence. I leaned forward, kept my tone even. You didn't protect Evelyn's name. You erased it. I won't let you erase mine. It didn't land like I expected. There was no gasp, no protest, no flurry of indignation, just a slow breath. And then, for the first time in years, Margaret didn't argue. She just nodded. Not every inheritance comes in dollars. Some arrive as dignity. The town library's auditorium wasn't grand, but it didn't need to be. The scent of wood polish and old paper filled the air, and the rows of folding chairs were filled with students, teachers, and people who had known Evelyn Scott as more than just a name attached to a last will. They remembered her as a piano teacher, a volunteer, a voice at every PTA meeting, and a woman who signed her Christmas cards with full sentences and underlined phrases like "believe in yourself and don't wait for permission." The stage was small, a podium, a screen, a microphone that crackled when tapped, and me. I wasn't nervous. I'd spoken before in meetings and pitches, even in a courtroom once during my divorce. But this was different. This was not defense. This was declaration. Ava introduced me as the Evelyn Scott Second Chance Fund's inaugural co-chair. The words felt solid, weighty, but not heavy, like the kind of burden you choose to carry because it feels like home. I stepped up to the mic. My grandmother believed in second chances, I said. Not just for careers or degrees, but for hearts, for mistakes, for people told they weren't enough because they didn't follow the script. A pause. A breath. This scholarship is for anyone told they weren't enough. The silence afterward didn't last long, but it landed deeply. I saw a girl in the second row dab her eyes with her sleeve. A teacher in the back nodded, arms crossed tightly. And somewhere off to the left, I saw Claire standing quiet, distant, but present. Ava took the podium again. She listed the scholarship's first-year recipients. Names, schools, plans, dreams. Then she said, as specified in the original draft of Evelyn Scott's final testament, Lauren Scott will serve as co-chair of the fund and as steward of its future mission. Applause. Genuine, not polite. I sat back down, letting the moment wash over me. Then the lights dimmed. On the screen behind the podium, a video began to play. Grainy at first, then clearer, Evelyn sitting at her kitchen table, sunlight on her shoulder. She wore her favorite green sweater, her hands folded gently. If you're seeing this, she said, then it means the plan worked. A soft laugh. I don't believe in fairy tales, but I believe in kindness. And sometimes kindness means standing when it would be easier to disappear. So if you're ever wondering what to do next, be kind, especially when it's inconvenient. Kindness is a kind of rebellion. She paused, smiled at the camera. Never stop rebelling. The lights came back up slowly, but no one moved right away. I smoothed my blazer and looked out at the audience and beyond them into the glossy panel of the window that framed the room. As the applause started, I looked up, and for the first time I saw Evelyn smiling, in my own reflection. They said they were ashamed of me, but I was never ashamed of the truth. The apartment still smelled like cinnamon, and now I was glad it did. For weeks, that scent had clung to my coat like a reminder of small beginnings of fresh chances baked in quiet corners. The bakery downstairs had new window decals for February, pink hearts and chocolate drizzle, but I was still writing about December. Still sifting through snowflakes that hadn't quite melted. My laptop sat open on the table, cursor blinking against a blank document I'd titled, "For Me and Maybe for You." I'd rewritten the opening line 6 times, then circled back to the first one. They said they were ashamed of me. That voice, Margaret's, echoed in my ribs sometimes. Not loud, just sharp. But it didn't cut anymore. I typed steadily now, letting the words come without checking for audience or approval. No performance. Just truth, told plainly. But I was never ashamed of the truth. I wrote about the apartment above the bakery, about being 28 and starting over, and how nobody prepares you for the way loneliness hums like a refrigerator, always there, even when you're not thinking about it. I wrote about family photos with you missing, about finding pieces of yourself in attics and basements and letters never meant to be hidden. I wrote about Evelyn, about how she left more than a house or a name, she left permission. To fight gently, to choose peace without surrender. Justice didn't come with thunder, it came with peace. And that was louder than anything they ever said. I stopped typing, just for a moment. My fingers found the bracelet in the drawer beside me. Evelyn's. Worn silver, just tarnished enough to feel lived in. I clipped it around my wrist and smiled, not at the screen, but at the silence. The kind that doesn't ache. The kind that lets you exhale without apology. Then I hit post. No hashtags. No filter. Just the monologue, the letter, the story sent into a world that didn't need to be fixed, just witnessed. At first, nothing happened. Then one comment. I needed this. Then another. You just told my story. Then hundreds. Truth heals. And none of them asked who Nathan was, or what town, or what name was left off the will. They didn't need the gossip. They found themselves in the grief, and that was enough. I closed the laptop, lit a candle, Let my phone buzz itself into stillness on the kitchen counter. Outside, the snow had started again. Inside, everything was quiet. Not empty, just whole. And somewhere out there, maybe someone else just took their first step too. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together.